Hello and welcome everyone to the monthly Fire Safe Sonoma Speaker Series. We live stream this program every month except for the month of December, so don't look for us next month because we're not going to be here. You won't either because you'll be out doing Christmas shopping or what have you. You can find our past Speaker Series programs on our YouTube channel. There's a lot of great information there. We're in our third year, I think. So go check it out on the YouTube channel. We have actually a couple of our presentations have got some really high numbers in terms of viewership. Probably the current most popular is Captain Wick, who's the helicopter pilot up at Boggs Mountain. He's the pilot, I think, of Copter 401. No. 104, Copter 104. Anyways, that one's got more hits by far than any other. But regardless, we've got a lot of good content out there. By the way, I am Roberta McIntyre, President and CEO of Fire Safe Sonoma, and I will be your public-facing host today. For those who might not know, Fire Safe Sonoma is the countywide Fire Safe Council, and we've been serving Sonoma County for 26 years. Yep, that's right. We've been working in this space before wildland fire safety and risk reduction was even popular. But before we get started, I want to thank Team Fire Safe Sonoma for helping out with us today. We have Emily Tugall. She's our county coordinator assigned to projects and programs. And then also we have Marika Ramsden, who is also a county coordinator, but she's assigned to Firewise and Outreach. And then we also have Rebecca Fisher. She's a past fellow who is now a member of our staff. And then also helping us out in the background today are our 4 California Climate Action Corps fellows, Julie Edwards, Alina Brammer, Malia Zimmerman, and Aiden DeYoung. So thank you guys for helping out. I could not do this without y'all. And also you guys don't forget to check out the Fire Safe Sonoma calendar on our website for upcoming events. We try to post stuff as we hear about things on there. So if you're looking for some wildland fire safety events in the county, you probably find them there, at least if we're aware of them. And if you have any events that you want to share out, send them our way and we'll get them on our public facing calendar. And then of course we have our regular board meeting it's coming up here on November 25th at 3:30. So you can sign up for our board meetings through our website, and we'll drop that link in the chat. Another thing coming up is called it's something our fellows are doing with the Audubon Canyon Ranch. They're through a Fire Forward Fellowship program for Sonoma County residents to learn about good fire. It's called Land X Good Fire or Land Cross Good Fire. It's part of the Resilient Forests and Watersheds Workshop Series, funded in part by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation in Sonoma County. And that's happening on December 14th from 9 to 3 p.m. And then, of course, again, to stay in the loop, sign up for our updates, and you can do that through our website. All right, so last month I stepped in as the talent to do a presentation on low-cost structural hardening retrofits. That presentation is on our YouTube channel, so feel free to check that out after watching today's speaker series, if you have nothing better to do. This month, we are pleased to be joined by 2 speakers, Chief Scott Westrope and Chief Ben Nicholls. Together, they will explain the structure and hierarchy of CAL FIRE and how the local fire agencies in Sonoma County and beyond fold in to the incident management system and how they work together to respond to emergencies. So they're going to kind of unpack some of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes in terms of incident management and resource management as far as multi-agency incidents go. Chief Scott Westrope, he started his career in 1994 in San Luis Obispo County before joining the Santa Rosa Fire Department in 2000. He rose through the ranks to become fire chief in 2021. And Westrope holds a bachelor's in emergency services management, a Homeland Security certificate, and he's also a certified chief officer. And Chief Ben Nicholls has 30 years of experience with the California Department of Forestry fire protection, what we call CAL FIRE. Chief Nicholls has worked in a variety of programs and specialties throughout his career, including wildland and municipal fire protection, emergency command center operations, fire prevention, law enforcement, and pre-fire, among other things. In his current assignment, Chief Nicholls oversees and coordinates CAL FIRE operations throughout Sonoma County. Chief Nicholls has been a part of firefighting operations on all major wildland fires in Sonoma County since 2017. Let's welcome Chief Scott Westrope and Chief Ben Nicholls to our presentation, and I'm going to hand it off to them. Thank you guys for doing this for us. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you, Fire Safe Sonoma, for having us. Ben and I have a presentation here to go through exactly what Roberta described, which is talking about the organizational makeup of our different departments. And then we get into sort of how the operations flow between local government and state resources and how we help each other out both ways. And then get into, towards the end of the presentation, some of the enhancements that we've enacted throughout the county as an operational area, both at the state and local government resources to respond to wildfires and work with the community on wildfires. So Ben, if you could pull up the presentation.
Yes, working on that now. Wrong one. Okay. Everybody got the right screen showing? Or did I flip it?
Actually, you have to flip it, Chief.
I flipped it the wrong way. I tried to prepare.
No worries.
That wasn't it.
We have a very understanding, forgiving audience in this group.
All right. Thumbs up if you got the full screen for fire service cohesion. Chief Westrope says we are good to go.
Good to go. Thank you. You far exceeded my technological abilities about 5 minutes ago. So we just titled this Fire Service Cohesion. There's a lot to it. And, one of the things that hopefully we don't do, we'll try really hard, is not to get into the technical nomenclature too much that we tend to drift into. So Roberta gave us a nice introduction, so I think we can skip through that. So one thing we want to do is talk about the departments, and I think where it's important for the community to understand this is the size and scope of what a local fire department is versus what the state has as far as resources, and then we'll blend that together on how we work together. So quickly about the Santa Rosa Fire Department, you'll see here our organizational structure. Santa Rosa Fire Department's 169 members, hardworking personnel across 3 different bureaus. So we have the Operations Bureau, which is what you see most of the time. It's the day-to-day fire engines and ladder trucks, and our training division, our sports services division, and our EMS division. In operations, we run about 30,000 calls a year for service, which is, we see a 2 to 3% increase in call volume per year. And then we have our Prevention Bureau, which is led by Fire Marshal Paul Lowenthal. He's not the fire chief, even though a lot of people think that. But Paul's our PAO, and he's the fire marshal. And they run all of the prevention side of the house and all the investigation side of the house. Last but certainly not least is our Admin Bureau. Our Admin Bureau is made up of only 6 personnel that run the entire business side of our operation, and they do a fantastic job in human resources, accounting, community outreach, IT, things like that. And then we also house the city's 2 emergency managers. So if we have an EOC activation, or if we're in the mitigation or preparation stages of an emergency, and you can imagine they're working pretty hard right now with the rain that we have the 2 emergency managers as well. So I bring that into context because Ben's going to talk about the state here in the next slide. So we have 169 people that operate 10 fire stations with 14 on-duty pieces of equipment that protect, 180 plus thousand people, 44 square miles. But we're limited in our resources, and we're limited in our ability to respond to major incidents. So as we go through this, Ben will really get into how we help each other out. either we need the state to come in or sometimes we go and help the state. It really just depends. So just putting into context, and a lot of people don't understand that, our job as the Santa Rosa Fire Department is to primarily protect the 44 square miles and the residents of Santa Rosa. There's a lot of different sized fire departments throughout Sonoma County. We still have volunteer fire departments. We're the biggest full-time fire department, but there's combination departments that do both. And then we have CAL FIRE that is not only in the city, but surrounds the city. So we all have to work in harmony together, which is why this was titled Fire Service Cohesion. So with that, Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chief. So as Chief Westrope mentioned, I think that's a great point to keep in mind as we go through the conversation today, is that each organized fire department is designed, built, and staffed to deal with day-to-day emergency activity, emergency incidents that they're tasked with handling. So when we talk about the city, it's a couple working structure fires at the same time. For the state here in the Sonoma Lake Napa unit, that may be 1 to 3 separate wildland fires going at any one point in time across the unit. But it's when we have these larger fire events that no agency by themselves has the staffing to fully staff that incident. And so we'll get into that as we go along here. But that was a great point made by Chief, is that ultimately we have personnel and resources for day-to-day incident activity, not individually for those conflagration type events. So on the CAL FIRE side, I had not done a whole lot of tinkering with an org chart in PowerPoint before, and I got to a point here with this where I decided we were going to keep it where it was at because it was too much to undo it. So I started at the Sacramento level with Director Tyler up there at the top of the pyramid there, who oversees the state of California. And for CAL FIRE, the state is broken into a northern region and a southern region. And within those regions, there's 21 CAL FIRE administrative units. And so Sonoma Lake Napa is one of those 21 units. There's 12 units in the north region and 9 in the southern region. And here in the Sonoma Lake Napa unit, we have a unit chief, and our current unit chief is Matt Ryan. He is in command of the 6 counties that make up the Sonoma Lake Napa unit, and approximately 500 personnel at peak staffing during the middle of the summer operations. With that, those personnel staff 31 Type 3 fire engines across those 6 counties, 6 hand crews between 2 fire camps and 1 fire center, 6 bulldozers, and then out of Sonoma Air Attack Base, 1 air attack platform that runs the aerial firefight, along with 2 air tankers at that base. We have the 1 Type 1 helicopter with crew up at Boggs Mountain Heli-Tac, as well as the exclusive use helicopters that we've had the last couple years, 1 at Sonoma and 1 at Napa. To Chief's point, we spent a lot of time talking about firefighters and suppression resources, but we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the pre-fire and the prevention work that goes on before those fires ignite. And so with that, in our unit, not only do we have the deputy chief of operations, Russell West, who is responsible for the 4 geographic divisions, the west, north, south, and east, as well as a central division that's kind of a catch-all for safety, training, and fleet. But he also supervises our Fire Prevention Bureau. And in our Fire Prevention Bureau, it's led by a battalion chief who has 9 fire captains working for him. In this case, right now, Chief Baldwin. And so those 10 personnel are full-time peace officers with CAL FIRE in the state of California. So they're responsible for origin and cause investigations, determining what's causing our fires so that we can hopefully prevent those future fires. And so then to go hand in hand with the prevention folks, we have the pre-fire division, which is led by Division Chief Mike Wink, who has 13 personnel underneath him that are responsible for defensible space inspections, for our fuels treatments and vegetation management across the unit, as well as public information when we're sharing information with the public, and ultimately the grant operations. So large organization, I didn't capture everybody because it's just too much of a space and it was going to get too small. Can probably hardly see it as it is, but I've captured the 4 geographic battalions here in Sonoma County. We have the Santa Rosa Battalion, the River Battalion, the Glen Ellen Battalion, and the Healdsburg Battalion. Each of those battalions have 2 CAL FIRE stations within them, with the exception being the River Battalion that has 3 total stations in that battalion. We have just recently added a relief battalion chief to help cover the days between the current battalion chiefs. And then the Hood Mountain Fire Center will be being added to the division organizational chart here in a couple of weeks. And that's led by a battalion chief with his fire crew at that fire center. So a total of 40 personnel attached to Hood Mountain Fire Center to facilitate not only fuels treatment, but fire suppression in the event that we have wildfires here in the unit and across the state. So this is a reoccurring theme across the county when I talk to individuals, fire safe communities, and NGOs about the difference between LRA, SRA, and why there's multiple agencies responding to the same fire. So hopefully this kind of gives you a greater understanding of what it means when we talk about those acronyms that we love to throw around. And so we're going to talk about it. So the local responsibility area, or the LRA, is the gray area that you see basically through the center of the county. And if you're familiar with those areas, obviously most of that is relatively flat ground and is incorporated in cities like Santa Rosa, Petaluma, Healdsburg, and Cloverdale. And then in the yellow areas, we identify as the state responsibility area. And that's basically the topography around that kind of Santa Rosa plain that constitutes the watershed and the forest lands here in the county. Green is FRA, that you can probably not really make out, but Lake Sonoma is federal land managed by the Army Corps of Engineers. We have the Kashaya Reservation out on the coast, which is BIA. We have BLM along the Lake and Sonoma County line. And then we have the U.S. Coast Guard base 2 Rock down there at the border. So FRA, a lot of folks then would ask, well, where are the federal firefighters to go with the local and state firefighters? There's such a thing in our world called DPA, or the Direct Protection Area. And that direct protection area is such that the federal government to build and maintain staff and a fire station in those remote areas, it's easier for them to ask the state and local fire agencies to provide their fire protection for them on a day-to-day basis. It's still their land, but we're providing that protection under a direct protection agreement. And then we have MTZs, and the most famous MTZ probably here in the county is the Fountain Grove MTZ on the northeast corner of Santa Rosa. That these areas are areas that are pre-identified as a mutual threat to both the LRA and the SRA due to that threat of life property, due to the life property threat that's there, and or the ignition from that built environment extending into the wildland or the SRA and creating a large fire that way. So in these MTZs, Fitch Mountain is another one that we are, both the local agencies and the state are sending a full response from either side, with the idea that that fire has an opportunity to impact both areas of responsibility in short order. So kind of a deeper dive into that, in that the LRA, just as a catch up, is that non-watershed. It's a higher density of housing that basically breaks up that vegetation and isn't considered forest land, watershed, or range or forage lands. And those are covered underneath Public Resources Code 4126 and 27. But the takeaway for you is that when we talk about the different responsibilities in the county and those different responses, think that the SRA is the area where the state has the financial responsibility in preventing and suppressing those wildfires in those areas, while the overlap with that local fire district or fire department, that agency has the responsibility, the ultimate responsibility for protection of lives and property rather than that wildland component. So the local agency is responding to protect their lives and property in their district or their department or their city limits, while the state is responding for that threat to the watershed and or the wildland environment. So we think about our recent fire activity in changing operations here in Sonoma County and across the state. But in earnest, this really began back in the fire siege of 1970, which was a 13-day period of time from September 22nd through October 4th of that year. And during that 13-day period, there were 773 wildfires that ignited, burning a little more than 576,000 acres of land, destroying 722 homes, and unfortunately causing 16 fatalities by the time those fires were extinguished. Those fires ranged from the Oakland Hills up in our neck of the woods all the way down to the Southern California, with Southern California having the predominant acreage by the time that event was finished. There's a great documentary that was put together about it called The Countdown to Calamity. It was produced in 1971, so it was about a year after the fires occurred, but it lays the foundation as to what they experienced at the time and what those changes came about because of that event. The top right photo that you see is downtown Oakland looking up towards the hills, and that really registered with me putting together this slideshow, because I think you're going to find almost an identical shot in 91 during the fire in the Oakland Hills that consumed those thousands of homes during that event. So this is something that, while we have experienced it in our careers and Chief Westrope and I's careers now, this is something that the state has been dealing with for quite a while. And so in the 1970s, this was the first well-documented fire siege that the modern fire service was dealing with. And so at that point in time, there was not a widely accepted interagency standard for kind of organizing a management structure at the various fires and incidents, or for sharing resources across agency and state boundaries. So this really was the birth of the modern mutual aid system, because trial by error, right? In this scenario, while the fires went out, they identified a lot of things that could be cleaned up post-fire. And so the federal government actually funded a project called FireScope. Fire Service loves their acronyms. Firefighting Resources of Southern California, organized for potential emergencies. And through this group, the Incident Command System, or ICS, was created and is now used internationally as a benchmark for incident management. And while it was developed for wildfires, ICS has been used since 1976 for all risk incidents, from mass casualty incidents to oil spills. Coast Guard was one of the first non-fire service agencies that adopted this to bring into their incident mitigation for the oil spill events and large incidents that they have. For those of you that are interested in the countdown to calamity, it runs about 29 minutes. So I decided to not play that for you today. But one of those things that came about from this, so tanker and tanker, right? Well, that was the deal in 1970, was some agencies called water tenders tankers, and some agencies called air tankers tankers. And so when incident commanders across the state were requesting resources, and an IC thought that they were getting an air tanker coming to their fire, 3 hours later, a water tender from a local agency showed up because they had to drive from Northern California to their fire. So it was determined post-incident that common terminology was an absolute must across the state, so that everybody called the different resources the same thing, so that when Chief Westrope or Chief Fennessy now down in Orange County is making a request for a resource, they know what's going to arrive at scene based on a predetermined makeup of what those resources look like. So The other issue that was identified was resource ordering. So the need for a unified ordering point, because what was happening was multiple incident command posts and incident organization structures were being set up for the same fire based on an agency boundary line rather than the overall fire footprint. And so to go with that, there was not a clear statewide resource allocation method where resources were actually passing each other on the I-5 corridor, going north and south to fires that they probably should have stayed in their local areas to combat. But the resource ordering system was not what it became post creation of Fire Scope. And so Fire Scope created two main documents out of their process. One being the multi-agency coordinating system that we refer to as MAX, and the incident command system, ICS. The MAX, what it brought us was the establishing of priorities for extended and major incidents, because when the state's burning, how do you decide what fires you're going to allocate those resources to versus the other fire that's just as large? Establishing and or implementing communication systems integration. Before there was your local radio network, but they weren't necessarily connected with the other agencies. So the ability for interoperability communication from agency to agency across the state. Ensuring information coordination was both shared internally and externally so that there wasn't an increase of fog of war of what was going on across the state. And then establishing intergovernmental decision coordination. So making sure that the different entities all had a voice in that process. And so as we talk about large fires, this is something that happens daily throughout the state as we experience our large fires during fire season. So this is the priority rating procedure on how resources are allocated to the different fires across the state. So if you're wondering, why am I not seeing more resources on our local fire? Well, there's a very good chance that through the process of questions that you see on the screen now, there may be another fire that has more life and safety threats to it. There may be more property threatened and or high damage of property within the next 48 hours. We're trying to minimize that impact, right? That fire has already escaped initial control and is now become a major fire. And so how do we minimize the damage across a greater area when we have multiple fires burning at the same time? Resource issues and potential for loss. So what is it that we need to put this fire to bed so we can get on to the next fire? And then the complexity or the duration of that incident. And then keeping in mind that even while the state is on fire and we've got multiple major fires from north to south, new fires, initial attack or new emergency incidents have the priority for resources, with the idea that if we hit those hard and we contain those before they become a major fire, that's one less major fire that we have to figure out how to staff as that fire siege continues. So mutual aid system, California, unfortunately, we exercise it often enough that we really are the benchmark for the rest of the nation and or the world in how we move resources when we have our wildfire events here in the state. So that fire happens at the local level, and the question is can we staff that fire with the local resources? If not the local resources, are there the resources in that local operational area or that CAL FIRE unit that can be brought to bear? And if not there, then it has to be elevated to our regions, whether or not it's the OES regions. Here in Sonoma County, we're in OES region 2, or on the CAL FIRE side, is it a resource that can be staffed from the CAL FIRE northern region, basically the north part of the state? Or are we out of resources in those regions? And so now we have to go to Sacramento to get resources from elsewhere in the state. And there's periods of time, unfortunately, where we have total drawdown across the state. And so now we need to go to our federal partners and or outside states to bring in outside state local government equipment. And we make that process, that system used to be much slower, but it's now tied to a computer system known as the Interagency Resource Ordering Capability System, or IROC. And that system transmits that information real time when we're looking for those additional resources from outside of our geographic areas to bring additional resources in from those outside areas. I won't bore you with the agreements that I captured there, but there's also a lot of pre-incident agreements that have been hashed out between the local government and the forest agencies, and between the state of California and the federal agencies as far as fires on forested lands, and then master mutual aid to reduce that reflex time from the time that that request is made from the incident commander to get that resource to the fire to mitigate that fire and put it out. So just to continue on the common terminology, you may not be able to see them super great on your screen, but the takeaway was that when it was said and done, there was the resource, what it is, and then basically what that radio call sign is. So you'll notice that it's no longer a tanker in the modern era, it's a water tender. And depending on the size of water tender that you're looking for, that's spelled out so that incident commander can make that appropriate resource order based on what he or she needs at his or her fire. And then to that, when we start moving lots of resources, for those that are on the operational calls here in Sonoma County, you'll hear the fire chiefs talk about alpha strike teams or foxtrot strike teams. That gives you an idea, or not an idea, it lets you know what type of resource has been engaged in that firefight and has moved, so that there's that real-time knowledge of what's going on across the operational area and across the state. So the other component to FireScope was bringing us incident command system, right? ICS. And so the claim to fame of ICS is, while you see a large org chart in front of you, it is totally modular and can expand or contract based on the size and complexity of that incident. So during an average fire here in Sonoma County,
Hey, Chief Nicholls, can I interrupt for a second?
because you always have to have an incident commander. You have single resources, which are the fire engines, bulldozers, and crews that are coming to that fire. You have a division, a geographic identification on that fire for what those resources are working for. And then public information officer, we absolutely have to communicate to the world what's going on with the fire. And then depending on the complexity, we may actually end up with an operations section chief as well, to support the incident commander, so that basically the incident commander can give the firefighting operations to that ops section chief, while that incident commander is dealing with maybe evacuations or other elements. I see Roberta has her hand up, so go ahead, Roberta.
Yeah, real quick, I'm wondering, Chief, is there meant to be the slideshow up while you're talking?
Nobody's seen the slideshow?
I don't think it's up. Unless you guys have it up?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay. You're freaking me out. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, no, we're good.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. So that's your day-to-day org chart. But then on our major fires, like a Tubbs, like a Kincaid, like a Glass, all of those functions will be filled, and underneath those functions, there's people working for them, because the heaviest lift on a major fire is that logistical support for the resources, the fire engines and personnel that are out on the line, mitigating that fire. So to that point, CAL FIRE has 6 standing incident management teams that basically is that org chart of pre-incident identified people. So they have day jobs, but they've taken other duties as required on top of their normal function, so that in the event of a team activation, those personnel respond from their home geographic unit or department to the incident to be mitigated, with the idea that they've already worked together day to day. And so there's a much smoother transition to running a very stressful and large scale incident. So brings us back to day-to-day fire operations here in Sonoma County. So we talked about LRA and we talked about SRA. So a fire in the Santa Rosa Plain, in that gray land that we were talking about, this non-watershed, non-forest land, any given day for a vegetation fire or a wildland fire in that area, You're going to get one chief officer from the local agencies. You're going to get that home agency. So in this case, we'll use Santa Rosa as the example. You're going to get Battalion 1, one chief officer, 2 Type 1 engines, 2 Type 3 engines, a water tender, and SOCO 1 if available. Depending on the auto aid, you may also see a CAL FIRE battalion chief and a CAL FIRE engine respond to that fire. And that's your initial dispatch of resources with the idea to overwhelm that fire before it can become established as a larger fire. In the SRA, where we're dealing with topography and greater access issues, on the state side, you get the same response from the local agencies that you got for the LRA fire, but on the state side, you have a battalion chief, an air attack, 3 air tankers, 1 CAL FIRE agency helicopter with crew, 1 exclusive use helicopter, the Type 1 helitanker you see at the bottom right corner of the aircraft component there, 6 Type 3 engines, 2 hand crews, and 2 bulldozers. And again, the idea is to overwhelm that fire before it can become a major, an extended or major attack fire. So 6 engines, 6 CAL FIRE engines. If everybody's in quarters, there's 14 CAL FIRE engines in Sonoma County. So some of those engines may be coming from 40 to 45 minutes away, but it's part of an overall firefight with the idea that the aircraft, the local agency, and some of those local CAL FIRE resources get there initially to check that fire up before the other resources arrive. So how does that come into play? So we talked about earlier about different agencies calling things different things on fires, having multiple incident command posts, and not being unified. Chief Westrope and I have fought a handful of fires together over the years. That communication and coordination is paramount to both he and I to make sure that we're working together to put out those fires. And so this fire is a scenario in the yellow, which is the SRA, into the gray, which is the city limits of Santa Rosa Fountain Grove. So those of you that are familiar with the area, we have Paradise Ridge Winery in the shot. And then the western edge of the Fountain Grove area. So that fire originates in the SRA, but this is also part of the MTZ. And so you have resources from the city, from Sonoma County Fire District, and from CAL FIRE that are all dispatched to this fire at time of dispatch. For the map, when we talk about the fire service so that everybody's on the same sheet of music, we have an incident command post, which is where the incident commander is supposed to be, with the idea that with our major fires that we've experienced, that's the point that Department of Emergency Management is coming to in the state responsibility area, and Neil Bregman and his folks are coming to inside the city limits. They need to know where that ICP is so that they have that real-time communication with the incident commander, as well as the law enforcement agency having jurisdiction. Because while we can ask for evacuations, it's the law enforcement agency that has the jurisdiction to enforce that evacuation order when we get to that spot. Going further down the line, when we look at a wildland fire for firefighters, the heel, which is that pink dot on the left side of that amoeba on the screen, is where we base all of our orientation to that fire. So when we talk about sections of the fire, it is as if we're standing in that origin looking towards the flaming front or the head of that fire. And so the left flank, not the north flank, but the left flank, because we can all orient to that, is Division Alpha in this scenario. And the right flank is Division Whiskey. And we do that so that as a fire grows, we have the ability to grow with that fire. So in the event that that fire continues across the ridge top there and into deeper into Santa Rosa, we now can add Division Bravo and Charlie on the left flanks, and the corresponding divisions running down the right flank from Whiskey, with the idea that ultimately they'll come together if we have a large enough fire. Totally different scenario, but in a large fire, you can actually get into branches, which then starts the whole naming convention over again because of the size of the fire. But we won't get into that one as deep, other than the fact that this is a great example where, again, you have the city, the district, and CAL FIRE that are responding to the fire with that initial attack complement of resources, and the chief officers in this case, as the fire transitions, the fire is burning from the SRA into the city, so it's a threat right off the bat to the city of Santa Rosa. So as we take our lessons learned from the 1970s fires, we can now say that that's a threat to the city of Santa Rosa, and so now we're in unified command. Chief Westrope's Battalion 1, and ultimately probably Chief Westrope and I are going to be there if this is becoming a major fire. But our chiefs are attached at the hip because we both have jurisdiction and values at risk from this fire. And so any decisions made are crafted and implemented together at that unified command post at the heel of the fire. With that, I'll put it to Chief Westrope to add anything that you wanted to put in on that, and then we'll continue on with the conversation.
Thanks, Ben. I think you covered it well. In this situation, in this fire, not only did we have resources actively fighting fire, but we lined resources up across the ridge of Fountain Grove there on Glen Eagle Drive to protect any, if the fire got away, we'd be able to protect the city. But it's all in unison. It's all communicating and coordinated through the Unified Command System or Unified Command. So next slide, please. So real quick, and I know we're running short on time, so I'll kind of try to speed through some of this. I like to show this slide because we're going to get into talking about some improvements we've made to the operational system throughout the county, and this has really bled throughout the state. And Ben talked a little bit about that. But if you look at the 4 major fires that we've had here in Sonoma County, the Central Complex, which is commonly known as the Tubbs Nuns, it was actually called the Central LNU Complex. You can see that there was 24 fatalities throughout the incident, 9 within the city limits, 36,000 acres, and then the 5,600 structures destroyed, about 3,100 in the city limits. And then as we go through to the Kincaid in 2019, the LNU Lightning Complex or the Wallbridge Myers in earliest 2020, and the Glass Fire. You'll see over the course of those 3 years that the acreage doubled on the fire, but the fatalities dropped to 0 and the structures reduced significantly. And I can say that, myself and Ben and the other chiefs in this area, all the way up to Chief Tyler, our job and our mission is to bring this to a net zero across the board. But Mother Nature's going to have her way with us. And so it just shows the catalyst difference and the catalyst change that not only the fire service community, but all levels of government and the community itself has made in the course of 3 years. I'd say it's one of the bigger changes that you're ever going to see on such a complex matter in a short amount of time. But that just kind of leads into our next couple slides. If you could advance one, please. Real quick, talking about mutual aid for the Tubbs Nuns fire. Within the complex, there was over 1,000 engines, nearly 200 dozers, and over 250 hand crews on that incident. There was 2 different base camps, one in Napa and one in Santa Rosa in Sonoma County. At the time, we held a bunch of records for a little while, but unfortunately, the camp fire and subsequent fires after that, we've lost some of those records, which personally I'm okay with. The California Master Mutual Aid System has been touched on. It's the gold standard. It's what we've been using for 40, 50 years now. We're very good at it. We're trying to get our other partner agencies such as law enforcement and TPW and other facets of emergency response and recovery switched over to that. They still use sort of antiquated systems, and so they're starting to finally see the light in that. A couple of issues that we've had that the state's been working on is reflex time. And by the time we call for mutual aid to when mutual aid actually shows up, that can vary. It really depends on how busy the system is, and what resources are available. But the old ordering system was very slow and clunky, and we would break it quite often. But has been touched on, IROC is a much better system. Um, and one thing I'll say is, as we get into this, the improvements that we've made, one of the biggest things is communication. And I feel like as fire chiefs, we've always communicated well and coordinated well. But there's two stories very quick stories I'll share. Instead of going through the mutual aid system, there was a fire just south of my office. It was a vegetation fire that was burning into homes. While I was driving there, my phone rang. It was Ben. He said, "Do you need fire engine?" I said, "Yep, send them." And I hung up on him. That's all it took. The next one was there was a fire just west of the city limits, that was impacting, a mutual threat zone area. And I called Ben on the way there and I said, "Do you have any airplanes on the ground?" He said, "Yep." I said, "Send them," and hung up on him, and he sent those aircraft. So that's how fast it can work. We figure out the payment on the back end. We're not so much worried about that as much as we are protecting lives and property. So as much as the system works and it is the gold standard, we found efficiencies that we can add to the system as well. Um, and then this bleeds over into law enforcement and then emergency managers. And we talked about the rest of this. So we can just skip to the next slide, please. I think I'll skip this one, Ben. This talks about, some improvements we've made, but getting into sort of systematically the improvements that we've seen here in Sonoma County. And we'll cover all these in very brief detail. But for early detection, the improved alert and warning systems, our cooperation and collaboration, operational enhancements, and community engagement, we've really hit on all of those areas a lot, and we work on it continually every day. The top right photo that you see there is actually a screenshot from my phone. That was the Kincaid fire starting at first call. I was in our emergency operations center that night because we had a significant red flag event. The fire started, the cameras picked it up, and we actually already had resources there. But that's how quickly we were able to react to that. It was at time of dispatch. We could get a view of the fire, and we already had pre-positioned resources there to work on that. But again, with 60, 70 mile an hour winds, there's only so much two strike teams can do, and the rest is sort of history that we've had to learn from. So next slide, please. So early detection, there's a couple big things. The camera network system, which is publicly accessible, alertwildfire.org. It's up and down the state. They're adding cameras all the time. They're working on an AI feature. We've beta tested it, and it unfortunately picked up too much. And so they're trying to detail the science into where it's not alerting us for everything. But you can see here on the left, it's a screenshot of a burn scar area. But these cameras spin around all the time, and so we can actually triangulate and get resources to a fire if it's out in the wilderness, or we can monitor and detect fires very early on. We also have the remote automated weather stations. There's several throughout the county, so we can monitor because, as you all know, we have significant microclimates throughout Sonoma County. And even within the city of Santa Rosa, we have significant microclimates, and we just added 7 ROS weather stations to the system as well, so we can monitor the microclimates. So if we're talking about positioning resources or front-loading resources, we know exactly where the weather is going to be the worst. Next slide, please. Alert and warning. This is obviously a huge change here. And so really, it's been a change in philosophy. In 2017, there was a philosophy taken outside of the city or the state's hands on how the alert and warning systems are going to be used. But now they're very widely used. And there's a great philosophy behind how and when we're going to use them. For the city, we actually have access to our own IPAWS network, which is the wireless emergency alert system and the NOAA weather radios. So we'll coordinate with our county partners in emergency management, determine who's going to do the evacuations. But during the glass fire was a great example. The city handled its own evacuations, where the county handled the evacuations outside of the city limits, and it worked very well. SOCO Alert's another one where it's an opt-in system to where you can sign up for SOCO Alert, and the system will call you in the middle of the night if we need to wake you up. Where iPause is not an opt-in system. It's already embedded into your phone and TVs and radios, as you all know. The high-low sirens are the European sounding sirens, is another thing we've added to all of our resources. So as we're driving through neighborhoods, if you hear a high-low siren, it's high-low, it's time to go. Nixle and social media we don't use as an alert and warning tool for emergency incidents. That's for non-emergency incidents. And then this was obviously a city slide. We have a city emergency page, which is srcity.org/emergency. We evacuate early, starting really with the Kincaid fire and continuing through the other two major campaign fires in 2020. And for both the city and the county, there are pre-designated evacuation zones. The city uses neighborhood names where the county uses a letter number matrix, but everybody should know what their evacuation zone is and be prepared for a alert or a warning or order. Cooperation and collaboration. I mean, this for us has been the biggest thing. I mean, I think we've always been good at it. It's just gotten a lot better. Both the federal, state, and local governments. Now the city managers and mayors meet during wildland season. All the emergency managers meet. We have a conference call once a week, unless there is a major incident. We're even having daily conference calls over this weather system that we're experiencing right now. And everybody's on the same page, whether it's county infrastructure, which is roads and facilities, all the way up to the fire op area and everything in between. So there's just a lot of we're just trying to be on the same page and make sure that we're speaking the same language. We've involved educational institutions and nonprofit organizations. They really help us out a lot if we have to do evacuations or have other areas where we need assistance. Next slide, please. Operational enhancements during significant weather events, whether it's a red flag or sometimes even during these atmospheric rivers, we will upstaff additional resources. We can either fund that through the county or through the Office of Emergency Services, so the state will pay for it. Ben can talk more about his side, but they will flex units in and out of the CAL FIRE unit based on where the weather is going to be the worst. So if there's a red flag here in Sonoma County, we may have 20 to 25 additional fire engines available for response, again, to keep the fires small where they start. We actually have the ability to do an all-call now within the county. So if we have a major incident, and this was first used during the Kincaid fire, there is a proverbial big red button that can be pushed in the dispatch center. We call every firefighter available in Sonoma County. So it just really speeds things up. And then obviously, with Fire Safe Sonoma support, the vegetation management plans and programs that have been prolific throughout the community. So on the prevention side, for Santa Rosa, we wrote a wildland resiliency and response strategic plan. From that, we funded through PG&E settlement funds, tripling our wildland fleet. We've changed the way we've lobbied at the federal and state level. We've changed all of our communication guidelines. We've changed a lot of our policies and procedures, but it was a way for us to improve our response to wildland operational events without adding personnel. So there's been a lot of changes throughout the community that have really improved our operational readiness. Next slide, please. Lastly is community engagement. And I will give the community, and I always do, give the community the highest praise for probably being the biggest catalyst change in Sonoma County. We have 500,000 people that have the little hairs on the back of their neck that stand up when the weather gets dry, when it gets hot, and when it gets windy. I would say we're very unique as a community in that. So what we as firefighters have had for years, now our whole community has. And so we've changed how we communicate with the community. We want to make sure that we're bridging the digital divide. So, we have the flags that go up. We have the warnings that go out on cell phones. We hold in the city, we hold a lot of community meetings and town halls. During red flag events, we're out on tactical patrol, engaging with the community, making sure that we have eyes on everything that's going on. And then, like I said, lastly, it's thanking all of you and acknowledging the community has made significant resources. When we have to evacuate, our community is ready to evacuate. They know what to do. We have tried it. We we have a storied history of it, unfortunately. You know, hopefully we never have to use it again, but likely we will. But we have, you know, our community has really, really stepped up and made a lot of changes, both on the fire prevention side and on the operational side and on the evacuation side. So with that, I believe that's the last slide, Ben. And so hopefully I got through that quick enough for you, Roberta, and we'll turn it back over to you to facilitate any questions you might have.
Great, fantastic, awesome presentation. We're probably going to go a little over time, but that's okay. So right now, what we want to do is we will go into the Q&A section. And we do have a couple of questions in the queue so far. Folks have been working frantically behind the scenes to make sure we got those in there. So I'm going to jump over to our Q&A section, and then we will get those questions. Let's see, where were they? Oh, I'm too far up. Okay, here I go. So, first question. Oh, yeah, the maps, LRA maps. So, somebody asked, when will the CAL FIRE statewide LRA maps be released? I'm not sure specifically what she means with that question because they're different things. LRA is quite a bit different than SRA. One of you guys want to try to handle that?
So the SRA LRA maps are a live document. So if you do type in SRA viewer into your web browser, that'll give you multiple links, but that'll get you to a deal that you can zoom into your house, your neighborhood to figure out what those LRA SRA lines are. They're fairly static. That's a review that's undertaken every 5 years. But you might also be talking about the fire hazard severity zone update. That is out for the SRA and is coming probably within the next year in the LRA. But that's something else that you can find online by doing FH fire hazard severity SV in your browser, and that'll bring up the video on how those are determined and why those are created the way they're created.
Okay, perfect. Next question is, what are the brackets for on the map on the perimeter attack line? You've got a pair of backwards ellipses.
So I glassed right over that. So thanks for keeping me honest. That's the division breaks. So the resources that are on the fire know based off of the map where those are at. So those are a lot of times used on a geographical road break or a ridge break. So that those resources, that division group supervisor knows what his or her dirt or line section is, and those resources that are assigned to that division know where they're supposed to be starting their operational shift.
Perfect, yeah. And next question, how does PG&E contribute to agency communication during wildfires and red flag warnings? How engaged, I guess a better question might be, how much engagement do y'all have with PG&E in terms of incident management?
So to Chief Westrope's point earlier, PG&E is a part of the operational area conference call for the intelligence section as far as that conversation coming into the event. So they're communicating what areas may be coming under the scope for the public safety power shutoffs and what they anticipate re-energization times to be post incident.
Perfect. And then Steve asks, are the PG&E remote weather stations tied into the systems that CAL FIRE and local fire departments use?
Absolutely. We use that for our situational awareness as we come into and are working through the weather events that we have. You'll notice a lot of times that those stations are showing a little higher wind speeds and a little drier weather relative humidity. Because they're up on a power pole 20 some odd feet off the ground versus your RAWS stations are closer to the ground, therefore closer to more moisture, which is the industry standard at basically eye level, and they're more protected from the wind at that level versus the 20 foot off the ground. So it's a tool that we use, but the RAWS stations, the remote automated weather stations that Chief mentioned, are the benchmark for what we're looking for.
Okay, and then this might be our last question. We'll see. Maybe we can hang out a little bit. Richard asks, is Bodega Bay in an LRA or SRA? And I think maybe if you can just kind of briefly describe the difference, that might be helpful to folks.
So deep SRA. So basically it's the Santa Rosa Plain here in the county that is the LRA portion of the county. So there's some one-offs, and what we don't want to do is create a checkerboard of area, because it makes it difficult for first responders to figure out response plans based on the different patches of ground in the county, and to make it contiguous so it makes sense. So one could argue that either downtown Guerneville, downtown Monterey, downtown Bodega Bay, those may not meet the threshold because of the structures per acre and kind of the makeup of the wildland environment there right in the core of town, but they're immediately against the SRA, and therefore that threat that could go either way. So to date, we've erred on keeping those in the SRA so that there's more resources coming rather than less.
Okay. Okay, for reals, this is our last question. I don't know if it's best directed at you two, but maybe you guys can give it a shot. What's the preparation time we should plan on to schedule an evacuation drill? For instance, Timber Cove Fire Protection District has a large area that is sparsely populated except for Timber Cove proper. So would the preparation time depend on the organizations involved? Timber Cove, FPD, CAL FIRE, other organizations. I think they're asking, yeah.
So Department of Emergency Management has put on multiple drills across the county. And Sea Ranch went through one, I believe, last summer. So if you're looking for the fire department or the community level of that, it might be great to reach out to Chief Plakos or the community up there. But also Department of Emergency Management is the agency that's hosting or putting together the drills. So I would reach out to Director Duvall and his staff to one, determine what sort of reflex time, and or two, that you would like to bring that drill to your community.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that answers it. Another part of that too is that I think the county might still have some funding available for groups that want to do an actual practice drill. If you reach out to Nancy Brown at Sonoma County Emergency Management and ask her about that, she still might have some funds for, community scale evacuation drills. So with that, I think we're gonna wrap this up. We're a little over 3, but thank you guys for staying a little bit late. I think that, thanks Chief Nicholls and Chief Westrope. And just remember, we won't be doing a speaker series next month. We'll be dark. However, our first speaker series of the new year will be our own California Climate Action Corps fellows, who will share their insights on fire preparedness and the relationship between fires and climate change. So I think there's a link in the chat you can check and to get yourself registered for that. So with that, thank you guys for attending. I do appreciate it.